All right, 1 minute, we'll start. Just try and have this Google Doc open. We'll also be working with, it's probably just easier if I share I'm going to change something. You're also going to need to open up another PDF. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. All right, so we're working with 2 things to start. Okay, obviously we'll be with all these throughout the assignment, but the first thing is please have open the Google Doc, and then also have open this. This is the readings to help us understand certain things, and we're going to start actually with the poll tax, which is source number 2. All right, we'll start in 20 seconds. Again, just have the materials out. We're also kind of just delaying to see if anyone else just pops in late. Usually we have like 25, 26 people. I think we only have 20 right now.
Now we're getting into the more messed up part of history.
Yeah, well, you know what? I got to say, we started with a pretty messed up part, the Civil War and slavery, and now we're getting to some more messed up stuff. A lot of American history is a combination of the messed up stuff and then kind of us overcoming the messed up stuff and leading to some really awesome, amazing things. So yeah, we're definitely going through the more messed up stuff, but it's led us to be in a much better place, which is a good thing. So that's a big reason why we look at American history and history in general, is to improve upon those mistakes. All right, let's go and start with this whole idea. So we're going to look at 3 ways the South limited African-American voting. And the first way is through something called a poll tax. All right, so we're going to look at what that is. Now, the last class we spent some time on the Jim Crow laws and then sharecropping. So we've already seen kind of some ways to limit African-Americans in terms of segregation. And then we looked at how we limited African-American rights through working a job like sharecropping. That was really, really tough. So a lot of African-Americans stayed poor. Now they're going to attack the 15th Amendment. How do they basically stop and limit African-Americans from voting? They're never going to outright stop it, but they're going to make it very challenging to vote. And we have a presidential election now in 5 days. Elections happen once a year, so to speak. So this was a way to specifically limit African Americans from voting. So let's just go through what this poll tax was. All right. So as Black Americans became better educated and found themselves in improved situations, white political leaders continue to look for ways to limit African American political power. The 46th General Assembly in 1889, which had no African American members, enacted a statewide poll tax as the first of several measures designed to limit Black voters. In an era when a salary of $25 a month supported an entire family, having to pay a fee of $1 or $2 was a significant deterrent or a way to keep people from doing something to many poor voters of both races. Georgia's first poll tax, signed into law in 1871 and expanded in 1877, had sidelined half of the state's Black voters by 1888. Every state belonging to the former Confederacy required some sort of poll tax by 1904. So all of the former Confederate states had this poll tax, okay? And what a poll tax is now we're going to fill in our graphic organizer, okay? Another word for a poll is voting. So in other words, it's a voting tax. So it's money that was charged to people to vote. Okay, so when I go vote on Tuesday for the presidential election and for all the elections, I get to walk in, it's free, I make my vote, and I leave. It doesn't cost me $1. It's free to vote. But back during Reconstruction, we established a poll tax. So it actually cost people money to vote. And people who were obviously not that wealthy weren't really that interested in spending maybe the modern day equivalent of $100 or $200 on that there. Who am I voting for? So I'm not going to share who I'm voting for just yet. And the reason is because it's usually like a personal question. Actually, I really don't mind sharing it with students, but we'll probably deal with that a little bit later on, maybe on election day. All right. So money that was charged to people to vote in an election. Okay. Now be careful here. This is not just specifically for African Americans, but you need to infer a couple of things. Many African Americans, because they're sharecroppers and don't have the best jobs at this point, can't afford to pay some more money to vote. So you know what a lot of African Americans do after the poll tax? They just don't show up and vote. They don't want to pay the modern day equivalent of $100 or $200 to pay for that. So that is way number one, to limit African Americans from voting. Okay? Plenty of white people couldn't afford the tax either, so don't get me wrong, so they wouldn't be able to vote either. But it was specifically targeted to go after African Americans because they understood many African Americans at the time were a little bit more poor. The next source we're going to read is source number 3, the literacy test. Okay? I think a lot of you guys know what literacy is. You guys are in ELA. You probably understand the word literacy. It has to do with usually reading and writing. So let's look at this reading and writing test. Another method of eliminating African American votes was the use of literacy tests. Surviving copies of these tests indicate that they were designed to cause the test taker to fail. One commonly used test asks the voter to explain complex passages from the United States Constitution. Another test asks confusing, ambiguous questions that could be interpreted in a number of ways so that every answer could be judged as wrong. Some tests were so long, no one can finish them in the allotted time. So here's an example here of the, what's it called? The literacy test. And this one's from the state of Louisiana. Now, if we were in class and live, we would actually take this test. And what would happen is if one person was to fail the test. What's going on in the chat here? If you're voting for Trump, you're out of pocket. I don't even know what that means. Donald Trump. Okay, so if you have any opinions on Donald Trump or Joe Biden, that's of course your prerogative, but let's focus on the assignment at hand because that's not what we're doing right now. And for anyone that is very passionate about the election, we'll spend election day dealing with that type of stuff. But the one thing I will say about that, ladies and gentlemen, there's going to be close to 150 or 160 million people voting. Pretty much half are going to vote for Trump, half are going to vote about Biden. So vote for Trump, half are going to vote for Biden.
So
if you are saying that you don't, what?
I'm talking to my classmates. Isaiah.
Why are you talking to your classmates, Sebastian? You should, if you're going to talk to them, you should talk to them in the chat, not while I'm talking. Regardless, if you're voting for Trump or you're voting for Biden, as a student, you got to be understanding that half of the country is going to vote opposite of you and have different beliefs as you, and you got to kind of be understanding of that. All right, so politics-wise, we're not talking about that now. Let's try and do a little bit of history from this point. All right. So literacy tests were these very difficult tests. And if you look at some of the questions here that you see on your screen, they're meant to be a little bit tough, okay? If you have a wrong answer, one wrong answer, you're going to fail the test. So there's 6 questions here. If you get one of the questions wrong, then you fail the test. And if you fail the test, you can't vote. Okay, so some of these questions here are a little tricky. Like this first one, draw a line around the number or letter of this sentence. Now, when I give this literacy test and you look at the answer key, usually half of the students that take this get this first question wrong because it's tricky. When I give this test in class, usually only 1 or 2 out of 30 students pass. Now, you guys are educated 8th grade students. Could you imagine giving this to an African-American student person who is not educated because they were a slave? pretty much all of them are going to fail. So this is a very complicated test, and the next thing we will fill out is a reading test.
Get over there.
A reading test that Jeriel, I don't even know what we're doing. Okay, because you came in late, Jeriel. We're working between a reading and this Google Doc here. Follow along with my screen. My screen is going, right? Just follow along my screen, and we're filling in the top box in terms of some guided notes, okay? So a reading test that if someone failed, aka got one question wrong, meant that they would have to vote again. Excuse me, that they have to vote again, I'm sorry, that they would not be able to vote. I can have something from my Regents class, I apologize. All right, so here's the reality of the situation. The goal of these was to specifically limit African Americans from voting. But when the actual poll tax and the literacy tests were put into place, not only did many black people fail the literacy test, not only did many black people not be able to pay the poll tax, guess what? A lot of white people couldn't either. If you were to take that literacy test, I guarantee most people would fail it, including me. I failed it when I took it once too. Not easy. It's meant to trick you. So this was a particular situation where the goal was not exactly met. So to fix that, they did something called the grandfather clause. And that's the last document we're reading together, and we'll go over what the grandfather clause is. Again, you should be filling out this box as we go through it. So here is the grandfather clause. The grandfather clause was a device once used by some states to discriminate against black people in voting. At first, these states imposed property owning, tax paying, and educational restrictions on the right to vote. Such requirements kept most blacks from voting, but also excluded many whites. Beginning with South Carolina in 1895, 7 states adopted constitutional provisions that allowed those who were able to vote before 1867, and those father or grandfather who could vote before 1867 to skip the tests and taxes. So this is the key thing, what I'm highlighting here. Does anyone remember what year the Civil War ends? And if you want to look it up quick, go ahead. I don't really care. But what year does the Civil War end?
1865.
Correct, Jane. Excellent. 1865. Obviously, if black people were slaves, they did not have the right to vote. So this specifically says, if your father or grandfather or ancestor was able to vote before 1867, which in other words would only be white people, right? If their father or grandfather were able to vote before 1867, they could skip the tests and taxes. So the final thing which brings us all together here is, if your father or grandfather was born before 1865, was able to vote before 1867, then they do not need to take the literacy test and pay the poll tax. So if you're following everything carefully, grandfather clause basically states only black people need to take the literacy test and only black people need to take the poll tax. Now what happens? Many black people can't pass the literacy test, or even if they can pass the literacy test, they would have to pay a tax to vote, and many could not afford that. So you know what happens to the number of black people voting from the years 1890 to 1950? Way down. Where at the start of the 15th Amendment in 1870, you're actually going to see they have a huge influence in the elections around the time. All right? So these were put into place to limit African American voting. Now, for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to introduce to you guys a group called the Ku Klux Klan. I think many of you are already familiar with the group. They're also known as the KKK. But they came out in the first time, and where they came out in the first time was in response to this. Okay? So if a black person was able to pass the literacy test, and they were able to pass the poll tax, they were allowed to go vote. But then they had to get through one more group. This intimidating group called the Ku Klux Klan. Okay? If you have your notebook and you would like to copy down this slide, I think it'd be really helpful. If you don't, it's okay. All right? If you just want to follow along and look or take a screenshot, you will see the KKK on your test, obviously. So let me present my screen. I just need to... Guys, just to make my life easier, is it okay if I just keep it at this size for now?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I was able to see.
It's okay. All right, thank you. All right, so let's look at what the Ku Klux Klan was. So they are a pretty scary domestic terrorist group, a group usually made up of, at the time, okay, where it started of former Confederate soldiers, and these former Confederate soldiers were very unhappy with losing the Civil War. So they're going to kind of go around, and originally they're going to go around and just police the South and make sure African Americans are behaving properly. But it goes so much further than that and becomes almost like an organization where they're going to terrorize and hurt or even kill people that disagreed with them. Okay, so I need to establish a couple of things. The KKK you're very probably familiar with, okay, were the ones you see on the bottom right box. That is not kind of how they looked in 1870 at the beginning of Reconstruction.
I'm more familiar with the bottom one.
Absolutely, and most are. The group that started in 1865 and lasted until 1871 didn't wear the big white hoods. They kind of just threw a hood on their face, you know, just like a mask, you know, something like you'd see during Halloween, nothing crazy. They did a lot of the same things that you saw, you know, maybe throughout American history. Yeah, they're like the budget. They're the startup version of the KKK. And they honestly didn't last long. And we'll learn why they didn't last long. They only lasted about 6-7 years. They weren't as strong of a group, but they still had the same certain tactics and tendencies that eventually became the big scary group later on in the 1900s. Okay, so from like 1871 to 1915, they weren't as strong of a group. Then like in 1920, 1930, they got very strong again. All right, so they are still a group today. After 1940, 1950, they really fizzled out again. Is there a group of KKK members today? Yes, but the group is a lot smaller. We're talking maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people in an entire country of 335 million people. It's really a small group. It's not necessarily a group that causes any problems anymore. Are they still a bad group? Absolutely. But they weren't like they used to be. Now, during American history, from like 1915 to 1930, there was like 5 or 6 million members. Okay, so we've come a long way from that. There's not nearly as many members. We're talking less than 0.1% of the population is a part of the KKK. So it's not a group we have to worry about as much today. All right. Are we still talking about the election? Guys, I promise you we'll talk plenty about the election, just not now. Right? In Texas, Biden has more votes than Trump. Yeah, Kelsey? I don't know, because they don't count the elections till Election Day. You might be seeing polling data that's a little bit different.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Can you go back to the other slide? I didn't get to finish copying the last part.
We'll go back to it in a little bit, sure.
All right.
Okay, just give me a little bit. Yes, Jason, so you could do that there. We're still on this slide. Okay, so the Ku Klux Klan, okay, was created to threaten African Americans who were able to pass the literacy test and the poll taxes to go vote. They would kind of go around, terrorize them, threaten them to not vote. If you vote, I'm going to kill you and your family, so to speak. a very disgusting type of way to go through it. Okay? The next thing is, obviously, the KKK was not just a group that threatened people. They would obviously take out their violence. And this is really the key thing I understand. And this was something I didn't understand when I was your age. When I was your age, I just assumed the KKK was only killing black people. And of course, that was their main target. But they went beyond just that. If you disagreed with the KKK at the time, they also would kill or threaten the white allies of black people. So if you were someone who stood up for the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment and you spoke out in favor of that, they would threaten you. The political party, the Republican Party, you guys remember the radical Republicans, they would be constantly going after them, threatening their families. Okay, Abraham Lincoln's party, the Republican Party, one of their major goals, the KKK early on, was not just to terrorize black people, but was to overthrow the Republican Party because that was the party that was against slavery at the time. Right? Yeah, so Casanova, they went to all groups. If you were white or Hispanic and you were for black people and black equal rights, then they would go after you as well. So it wasn't just the black people they went after, but obviously the black people they targeted the most. I mean, no question about it. Okay? So the KKK has a very bad type of history. It's a history we should just be aware of, and we are going to look a little bit deeper on in this class what they specifically did, but I'm just introducing them now. So Shanika, at the time, the Democrats were in the South, and the Democrats were the ones who would be opposed to the new African-American rights coming out. All right? So we're just being introduced to the KKK now because why are we doing this? Why? Because this group came out during Reconstruction. So while African Americans are starting to get more rights, Abdul, they're going to also have to deal with the KKK coming into play. Does that make sense?
So it's basically one more obstacle.
Correct. It's one more obstacle the African Americans had to overcome. Now, if those radical Republicans, if that group was in the country there in our government, they would be able to maybe stop the Ku Klux Klan. And you're going to see how the radical Republicans tomorrow actually fight up against the Ku Klux Klan and able to stop them. But that doesn't mean that they don't become powerful again, because they do. All right?
Oh my God.
The other-
Go ahead, Sebastian. We're all good? Everyone's good? Okay.
The Ku Klux Klan just kill people?
Would they kill people?
Yes. But
Yeah.
what? Knives?
Usually their biggest way of killing people, more in the 1920s and 1930s, was by the lynching that we saw. We remember the lynching from the brain pop.
Yeah.
And then you kind of see in the photo here, they were really meant to just terrorize and, terrorize people.
Did they
But
plan
what about
this?
guns?
Say that again?
What about guns?
They really wouldn't, they use guns to intimidate. I mean, they would, but the Ku Klux Klan doesn't necessarily kill a lot of people as opposed to just threatening. They were more of a scary group. Would they kill certain groups of people and certain people? Absolutely, but it was not a group that would kill large people in large numbers. It was just, a group that you were kind of had to be worried about, sort of thing.
Did they plan this to be a thing, to be like the last obstacle, and were they allowed in the country?
That's a very good question. Okay, so let me explain. If the Ku Klux Klan came to the north, they wouldn't be allowed. But remember, the South was still unhappy. They lost the Civil War. So some of the Ku Klux Klan members were actually in the government. Some of the Ku Klux Klan members, when I mean the government, I mean like the state governments, the mayors, the governors, okay, people like that. So they would kind of turn a blind eye, meaning they're not really going to pay attention to it, even though what the Ku Klux Klan is doing is illegal, of course. No one was really stopping them from doing it. Okay?
Oh.
And if you were a Ku Klux Klan member, you could just say, I'm a part of this group. You have the right to assemble in our country, and not really going over all of the horrible things that they're doing. They kind of acted like they didn't do it. But like everyone kind of knew what was going on. They just didn't say anything about it. All right. So now, like, pretty much, guys, if you're found out to be a KKK member or in the Ku Klux Klan, you get into serious trouble, obviously. But back then, not as much of a problem. So a lot of people ended up joining it, especially in the 1920s and 30s. Okay. So with that being said, I want to now go to this last document.
Okay.
There's some questions that you're noticing here at the bottom. You have a total of 5 questions you need to answer. 4 of them are going to be from the reading that I'm going to show you. The 5th one's going to be from a picture. So I'm going to show you both. So questions 1 through 4, you're going to have to use this reading here called Reversing Reconstruction. And I love the title of it because Reconstruction was a time where we're supposed to be bringing back our country together. We're supposed to be getting more rights for African Americans. And the Ku Klux Klan is reversing it. Okay, so we want to try and go over how the Ku Klux Klan, how the literacy test, how the poll tax really stopped African Americans and our country from rebuilding back together. All right, so questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can use this reading. When you get to question 5, okay, I know there's some question here. You don't have to worry about these. When you get to question 5, this picture you're going to use to help you get the answer of the notice and wonder. 2 things you notice about the photo, 2 questions you still have. Okay, and this is a pretty scary political cartoon when you really look at it. All right, so you are on your own at this point. You have 15 minutes to work on the 4 questions dealing with the reading, and then the 5th question, which deals with this picture.
There's 7 questions though, right?
Am I looking at the right thing?
No, they're 5.
5.
Oh, because I was looking at the picture.
No worries. Okay. So I'll mute myself. I'm going to take attendance. You guys have any questions, please just pop it in the chat, and we'll go from there.
Well, I think the life of Black.
Sebastian, Beta, anybody from my A6 or D6 group want to work in a separate chat? Just let me know. In a separate meet, just let me know, okay? Drop it in the chat.
So, I think for Black Black Americans, I think terribly.
Wait, I missed that part, Sebastian. Say it again.
So I think the lives as Black Americans were treated badly. It was terrible.
Yeah, the history of African American treatment, specifically in the South during Reconstruction, not very good. Okay, and that's why we're learning about these things to make
So
sure.
it was so it was only the South part that was really dangerous.
Correct. So at this point, if you're living in the North, you're not necessarily going to be dealing with the Ku Klux Klan and the literacy tests and the poll taxes, but we have to learn about it because the South is a part of our countries. Okay? Casanova is also correct. The Ku Klux Klan used to wear actually orange and black early on, but the new groups that you saw that you're more familiar with obviously wore white.
So Ms. S, I think people join the Ku Klux Klan.
What's the matter, Sebastian? What, Sebastian?
I think that people join the Ku Klux Klan because they want to think that white people have a stronger race.
That's definitely a possibility. That is probably one of the many reasons. You know, superiority. You know what I mean?
And don't forget about killing people.
Like Mr. Pena mentioned, it's not so much that they killed so many people. It was more like scare tactics, right?
So
There were
Is
definitely
it called
lynchings and so
supremacy?
on.
Isn't it called supremacy?
Yeah, so Jane,
Yeah, white supremacy, yeah.
literally the definition, like white supremacy would be something that the Ku Klux Klan would believe in, absolutely.
Okay, Sebastian?
okay, but I think oh, I think they joined the Ku Klux Klan just so they can. Hmm. I don't know. The Messiahs. They only joined the Ku Klux Klan. It's a kill. It's a
You know, Sebastian, I don't have enough information or knowledge in this area to exactly speak to what happened. Mr. Pena would be the right person to answer.
Give me your question
Apparently-
again, Sebastian.
So they only joined the Ku Klux Klan because join I don't know.
So, listen, if you were someone from the South who was upset the Civil War was over and their side lost, and they didn't want African American equality, so a person like
It's because their side lost.
right, so their side lost. They didn't believe that what the country was doing in bringing African American freedom was something that they wanted. Okay, they
So
didn't.
they want to sell a score.
They wanted basically to keep African Americans from not being free. And here's the pretty much reason. And this is horrible, but this was the truth at the time. Those particular people that joined the Ku Klux Klan did not see African Americans as equals. They looked at them as less of a person. So they didn't want them to do that. Ashley, it's at the bottom here. Okay, just keep scrolling down. All right. So Sebastian, you know, would a person today join the Ku Klux Klan? I highly, highly doubt it. Now, you got to have a really kind of messed up viewpoint to join a club like that. But there were people back then that had a different viewpoint than what we're kind of used to having today in 2020. So they joined the group if they were unhappy with all of the freedom for African Americans.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Was this Ku Klux Klan during the Jim Crow laws?
Correct. Well, actually, it's actually kind of a complicated question. Yes and no. They started out before the Jim Crow laws came out, but obviously, years after the Jim Crow laws get put into place, they're obviously around and obviously enforcing and favoring and happy with the Jim Crow laws. So they would have been a group.
Oh,
This is an outrage.
Of course it is. That's why we're learning about it.
The Jim Crow laws were created illegally.
Well, they were passed legally, but they are bad laws. That's why we've gotten rid of the laws, of course.
And also,
Yeah, they were being selfish. Hey, Kira, if you're done, you could just turn it in, and if you have all the questions answered and you're good with it, you could turn it in, and you're welcome to leave if you're done.
by restrictions, by crow restrictions.
Mr. Benio. Why did they burn crosses?
Why does the KKK burn crosses? Generally, they were a pretty religious group. So they burned.
Because they're not cross people.
No, so they used it as a sign of intimidation. The actual reasons why they burned a specific cross probably have to do with religion, but I don't have a specific answer for. But it was meant to intimidate.
Oh, okay.
Intimidate others, right?